Wyoming Territory. 1879, the morning wind bit through the cotton fields behind Xavier Granger's sprawling ranch house as he spotted her again, crouched by the wash basin, sleeves rolled to the elbows, scrubbing hard like her life depended on it. It probably did. Xavier reined in his horse by the side porch. "You always fight the laundry like it owes you something." She looked up fast, startled. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, a wet strand of dark hair stuck to her cheek. "Only when it gets the better of me," she said. Her name was Selene Foster. 19. Housemaid. No kin. She had been working in the Granger household for 3 years now, hired after her mother died of fever in Fort Laramie. She was quiet, kept to herself, but she never missed a day of work. She did not ask for much, just a future. Xavier dismounted, tied the reins to a post. "You eat anything this morning I had bread." She stood, drying her hands on her apron. "There is still coffee in the pot if you want some." He looked at her for a long second. "Come ride out with me," Selene blinked. "Now, you can get back to the laundry later," he said. "I want to show you something." She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. They rode west past the creek, where the land rose into low hills and the cottonwoods turned gold in the sun. After a mile, Xavier slowed his horse and pointed ahead. There was a patch of flat land with a view of the river bend and a foundation laid out in timber. "It is not much yet," he said, "but it will be. I have got the lumber coming in next week." Floorboards, windows, even proper paint. Selene stared at it. "You are building a house. For you," he said. She turned to him sharply. "I know it is not what you expected," Xavier said, "but you have spent enough of your life working under someone else's roof. I want you to have your own." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" He looked straight at her. "Because I want to build something that lasts, and I want it with you." Selene's breath caught, but she said nothing. Just turned back to the bare ground, the lines of timber, the future laid out like a promise. They rode back in silence, but something had shifted. That night, she stood by the kitchen window, watching dusk fall over the fields. When Xavier passed through, she turned and said, "I have never seen land like that before. It felt good." He gave a quiet nod, meeting her eyes. "It is yours if you want it." The days passed, but neither of them spoke about the house again. Not out loud. But Selene started cooking a bit more for him. She brought him fresh coffee when he rode in. He started checking her hands for calluses, offering her balm, small things. Nothing said, but everything felt. Then trouble came. It was late October when Selene was out behind the barn and heard the crying. Faint, high-pitched, not an animal. She followed it to the edge of the woods and found a boy and a girl huddled under a tree. The girl maybe 7. The boy barely 5, both barefoot, both shivering. Selene knelt. "Where are your parents?" The girl shook her head. "Gone." Xavier rode up fast when she sent for him. She had wrapped the children in her shawl and was cradling the boy. He was too weak to stand. "Found them just like this?" Xavier asked. Selene nodded. "Their names are Lottie and Levy. Their parents left them with a man 2 towns over. He beat them, then left." Xavier crouched beside her. "We will take them in." Selene's eyes filled. She nodded, holding the boy closer. That night they made beds in the attic. Selene sat with the children until they fell asleep. Xavier brought up a small oil lamp and left it burning low. No words, just the soft light of 2 people who knew what it meant to be left behind. Weeks passed. The house frame went up. Selene helped gather nails, painted the shutters. Lottie followed her everywhere. Levy trailed Xavier, mimicking the way he walked, the way he whistled for the horses. By November, the roof was on. By December, the firewood was stacked high inside. One evening, after supper, Xavier stood beside the hearth. Selene was brushing Lottie's hair while Levy played with a carved horse. "You still want that future?" Xavier asked quietly. Selene looked up. I do. I cannot give you riches, not like the railroad men back east, but I can give you my name. Selene froze. I want you to be my wife, he said. Not just for the house, not just for the children. For me, she stood slowly, heart pounding. Xavier, this is not what you promised at first. I know, he said. I promised you a future. I want to give you more than that. I want to build it with you. She crossed the room to him, eyes full. She did not speak. Just reached up, touched his cheek, and nodded. That night they stood outside under the stars. The wind was cold, but her hand in his was warm. Mrs. Granger, he said, testing the words. She smiled. It sounds right. He leaned in, pressed his forehead to hers. It is right. And for the first time in either of their lives, everything finally felt like it was going to be. The snow came early that winter. Not heavy, but enough to bury the last of the tall grass in a soft hush. The house creaked with the weight of cold air pressing against the windows, and the fields lay still, waiting for spring. Xavier stepped through the front door just as Selene was pulling the iron kettle from the hearth. Her hands were pink from the heat, a streak of flour on her cheek. He slipped off his gloves and hung his coat by the door, his shoulders dusted with snow. You were gone longer than usual, she said, not turning from the stove. I rode out to the southern fence. Elk tracks near the corner post. Could be they're headed west, but I wanted to be sure. She nodded, setting the kettle on the table. You still want that stew, or did you fill yourself on jerky again? He walked over and kissed her cheek just once before sitting down. I waited. Levy came thudding down the stairs, dragging one of Xavier's old scarves behind him. Lottie followed slower, her eyes still heavy with sleep. Selene knelt to button the boy's collar. You didn't wear your socks. I don't like him, he mumbled. Too bad, she said gently. You'll want them when the floor's cold enough to bite your toes off. Xavier poured coffee into 2 tin cups. The postmaster passed through this morning, he said. Said the town's looking for a new school teacher. Selene glanced up. You thinking of applying? I was thinking you could. Her hands paused over the bread tin. Me? You read better than most men I know. And you taught Lottie her letters before I even noticed she was holding a pencil. She sat slowly across from him, eyebrows drawn. I never finished formal schooling. He reached for her wrist, thumb brushing the inside like he was searching for a pulse. Doesn't mean you can't teach. She didn't answer right away. Lottie had taken to folding bits of paper into small animals and was lining them along the table ledge. Levy was chewing on a crust of bread, watching them both like he understood more than he let on. I'd have to go into town every day, Selene said softly. I'd ride with you, Xavier said, or see if Ruth Alcott's still keeping her wagon. It ain't far. She traced the rim of her cup. I never pictured myself in a classroom. No one said it had to be forever, he said. Only if it feels right. Selene nodded once, filing the thought away, the way she did when something mattered more than she wanted to admit. Later that night, after the children were asleep with quilts tucked up to their chins, Xavier found her sitting on the step outside the back door, shawl wrapped tight, breath curling in the dark. He sat beside her, boots crunching softly against the frozen boards. Did I push you too hard? He asked after a long moment. No, she said. I was just thinking about my mother. He waited. She used to say I'd never be more than what the world let me be, that folks like us didn't get to choose. Xavier looked out over the blank fields, pale under the moon. Do you believe that? I used to. Now I'm not sure. He didn't press her, just reached for her hand, their fingers lacing together without effort like they'd been waiting for that shape. I never wanted a big life, she said. Not like the stories in books, just safety, kindness. A place that doesn't go away when the wind changes. You've got that now, he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Then I guess the rest is just learning how to believe it'll stay. Xavier kissed her hair slow. It'll stay. The moon rode low and full over the hills, casting everything in silvery stillness. A coyote cried far off, but it didn't sound close enough to matter, and for the first time in years, Selene didn't feel like she had to keep her boots beside the door. January settled in with a brittle quiet, and the snow deepened in slow layers, muting the sounds of work and breath around the ranch. Mornings came gray and still, the kind that made boots feel stiff and breath sting in the chest. Inside the house, the warmth of the fire held close to the hearth but never quite reached the corners. Selene stood behind the sewing table, her hands steady as she pressed a hem flat. The fabric was wool, dark green and thick enough to keep out the wind. She had pieced it together from remnants Xavier had traded for in Cheyenne, a woman's coat, stitched with care. "I reckon that's finer than anything the general store carries," Ruth Alcott said from across the room, her own needle paused mid-stitch. "You always had an eye for lines." "It's not about looks," Selene replied quietly. "It needs to last." Ruth's smile faded into something thoughtful. "Well, lasting's the better kind of pretty anyway." Xavier had asked Ruth to stay on with the children while Selene began teaching in town. It was only 3 days a week, and the schoolhouse was barely a mile past the river, but they both agreed the children shouldn't be left without someone they trusted. Ruth had raised 7 of her own and had a temperament like warm bread plain, familiar and comforting. That evening, as the sun let go of the sky in copper streaks, Xavier returned from the far paddock, shoulders taut from hauling timber. He laid his gloves on the mantel and turned toward the kitchen, where Selene was wiping Lottie's face with a damp cloth. "You see the mare?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah, she's still favoring that left leg. I'll have to keep her off the trail another week." Selene nodded, folding the cloth. "I can walk to the schoolhouse tomorrow." Xavier leaned on the doorframe. "I'll take the wagon." "No reason for you to freeze your toes off." "I don't mind the cold." "I do," he said. "My wife's got more sense than to act like she doesn't feel it." She turned, lips curving in amusement, and he stepped in close enough to touch her hand. His fingers were rough from the day's work, but the contact was careful. "You're tired," she said. "Not too tired to stand here a minute." They didn't speak after that, not until the lamp was lit, the children tucked in, and the fire banked low. Later, she sat brushing her hair by the window, the comb slow through the dark strands. Xavier was shaving with cold water, the mirror balanced against the windowsill. His hand paused. "You ever think about adding to the family?" he asked. Selene didn't turn. "You mean more children?" "I do." She set the comb down gently. "I thought maybe you'd want to wait." "I'd wait a lifetime if that's what you needed, but I'm asking because I think this house is strong enough now. And I think we are too." She stood and crossed the room, pulling the curtain aside to look out over the frozen field. Then she turned to him, her eyes steady. "I want to raise children who don't flinch when they hear footsteps, who don't have to guess if they're wanted." He nodded once, solemn. "Then that's what we'll give them." In the days that followed, the routine settled deeper. Selene rose early, fed the children, and walked to the schoolhouse when the weather allowed. She came home with chalk dust on her sleeves and stories of shy boys and clever girls. Xavier repaired fences and checked livestock. They ate supper by lamplight. They spoke with ease. One morning in late February, she stood by the stove, holding a letter from the town council. "They're asking me to stay on through summer." Xavier looked up from where he was lacing Levy's boots. "Do you want to?" "I think I do." "You've got a way with them," he said. "Same way you had with me." She folded the letter and placed it in the drawer. "I never tried to change you." "No," he said, standing. "You just made me want more than I had." That night, With the wind rattling the shutters and the smell of wood smoke thick in the air, Selene rested her head on his chest and said, "I never thought I'd have a life where I got to choose." Xavier brushed her hair back, fingers lingering at her temple. "You chose me," he said, "and I'll never stop being grateful for that." Outside, the snow fell soft and steady, covering the earth in quiet promise. And inside they held each other like the ground beneath them finally belonged to them both. By early March, the ground had begun to thaw in streaks along the southern slope, where the sun lingered longer. The river, once silent under ice, now murmured faintly beneath its thinning crust. The change came slow, but it came like breath returning to a chest that hadn't realized it was holding still. Selene stood behind the schoolhouse one afternoon, collecting bits of slate from the yard where the children had dropped them in play. Her hands were chapped from the wind, her dress hem damp from the melt. She didn't mind. She liked the sound of boots in softening dirt, liked how the land seemed to stretch after months of stillness. When she heard the wagon wheels, she didn't turn right away. Xavier had taken the long route in that morning, past the timber camp to deliver lumber for a neighbor. She knew the sound of his team, how the left wheel clicked against the axle when the load shifted. "You're early," she said without looking up. "Only just," he answered, stepping down from the seat. He'd trimmed his beard shorter that week, and the wind had reddened his cheeks. He carried a parcel wrapped in oilcloth under one arm. "I stopped by the mercantile," he said, holding it out. She took it carefully, unwrapping the cloth to find a bound ledger, the cover worn but clean. Inside, the pages were lined and blank. "I thought maybe it was time you had something of your own to keep your lessons in. Or anything else you wanted to write down." Selene closed the cover with a quiet motion. "You think I've got things worth putting on paper? I know you do." She looked at him then, the way his eyes never rushed her, the way his words didn't need dressing up to ring true. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't give it for thanks." They walked back toward the wagon. A pair of meadowlarks called somewhere near the fence line. Selene climbed up into the passenger seat, setting the ledger in her lap. He didn't flick the reins just yet. "I heard from Henry Sims," he said. "He's hiring for the stock drive come April, wants to know if I'll go." She turned toward him slowly. "That's near 6 weeks gone. Maybe more," he said. "Depends on the weather and the herd." He didn't have to say it. The last time he'd ridden out that long was years before she came to the ranch. Back when he still believed the work would fill the quiet, Selene looked down at her hands, then out across the open field. "You want to go? I'm not sure." She didn't answer right away. The air had that sharp, clean smell that comes when snow begins to rot at the edges, the scent of damp wood and waiting earth. "If you think you need to," she said at last, "I'll manage here." Xavier's jaw shifted slightly, as if weighing something more than just miles. "I don't want to leave you wondering if I'll come back." "I won't wonder," she said, "but I'll miss you just the same." He reached across the bench, took her hand in his. His palm was rough, but his grip was gentle. "I haven't said it," he said, "but I should have." She turned to him, brows lifted slightly. "I love you." The words settled between them, quiet as the falling dusk. She didn't answer with words, just leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder, the weight of it steady sure. They rode the rest of the way home like that, the wheels bumping softly over the rutted path, the horses moving at an easy pace. Neither of them spoke again, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't empty, it was full. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned down to coals, Selene opened the ledger and began to write. She didn't start with her students' names or lesson plans. She wrote about a man who promised her a future and gave her something steadier instead. She wrote about warmth that didn't fade when the fire died down. She wrote about choosing to stay and being chosen in return. By late March, the river had broken through its ice. Water moved fully now, slow but certain, carving its way through the thawing land. In the early hours before sunrise, the ranch creaked and sighed with the season's shift, as if even the beams and stones had been holding their breath all winter. Xavier stood over the workbench in the barn, a length of harness leather laid out before him. His hands moved with practiced ease, threading through brass fittings, pulling tight with a steady rhythm. Celine's voice carried from the doorway, low and even. "You've been out here since before the rooster crowed." He didn't look up. The cinch on the pack mule's worn halfway through. "I don't fancy losing gear on the trail." She stepped inside, arms wrapped in a shawl she hadn't worn since autumn. "You've made up your mind, then?" He set down the awl. "I have. The drive leaves next Monday." Selene pulled in a breath, then let it go slowly. "What changed it?" "I kept thinking I needed a reason to stay," he said. "Then I realized I was already standing in it." She walked the rest of the way in, boots crunching softly on the straw. "Then why go?" He looked at her then, hands still, eyes steady. "Because I want to come back stronger. For you, for the children, for this place we're building." She nodded once, the motion small but certain. "Then we'll be waiting." The days before his departure passed without fanfare. He packed light provisions, a rifle, a Bible he hadn't opened much but kept just the same. Ruth agreed to stay on until summer, and Lottie picked early wildflowers to press between pages of her primer. The morning he left, Selene stood outside the gate with Levy in her arms and Lottie clutching her skirt. Xavier bent down, kissed the girl's temple, then ruffled the boy's hair. He straightened, turned to Selene. "I'll be back before the wheat's knee-high." She reached up, laid her hand against his chest. "Just come back safe." He leaned in, and they kissed with no hesitation, no shyness. It was not rushed or desperate, it was rooted, like everything between them. When he rode off, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. The weeks that followed came with their own rhythm. Selene rose earlier than before, splitting kindling before the children woke, keeping the stove warm and the schoolhouse in order. Each Sunday, she marked a line in the ledger Xavier had given her, counting time not in days, but in distance closed. One afternoon in late April, she came home from the schoolhouse to find a parcel wrapped in burlap on the porch. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved, with a note inside. She unfolded it carefully. "Found this cedar up in the foothills. Thought you'd make better use of it than I would." Inside the box were dried herbs, soft wool thread, and a folded square of muslin stitched with her initials. She ran her fingers over the cloth. It wasn't store-bought. He'd done it with his own hands. He returned on the 1st of May. The wagon pulled up just after midday, dust trailing behind like a ribbon. Lottie spotted him first and let out a sharp call from the pasture. Selene dropped the pail in her hands and ran. He stepped down slow, favoring his left knee but smiling wide. She didn't wait for words. She threw her arms around his neck and held on, her face pressed into his shoulder, the smell of dust and sweat and horses and home. "You're late," she whispered. "Just wanted to make sure you missed me." She pulled back, looked at him fully. "Did you find what you needed?" He nodded. "I found I didn't need to go far to know what matters." That summer they planted a garden behind the house. Corn, beans, squash. Xavier built a swing for Lottie, and Levy took to following him into the barn, mimicking his every move. Selene taught through the end of term, then gave notice, choosing instead to open a reading circle in the house. Each week children came from 3 farms over, bare feet and wide eyes, eager for stories. In August, the sun turned the fields gold. Selene stood barefoot in the stream behind the house, letting the cool water run over her ankles, a letter from the doctor folded in her apron pocket. When Xavier came to find her, she didn't speak, just handed him the paper. His eyes scanned the words, then rose to meet hers. "You sure?" she nodded. "Yes." He stepped into the water, boots and all, and picked her up with both arms. She laughed, the sound bright and unguarded, and he kissed her in the middle of the stream where the world felt wide and still. They named the baby Ruth, and she was born on a calm September night, with both Lottie and Levy waiting outside the bedroom door, quiet and reverent. Xavier held her first, his calloused hands impossibly gentle, and whispered something only she could hear. Selene watched him from the pillows, hair damp, eyes bright with exhaustion and joy. "She's got your steadiness," she said. He looked up, voice thick. "She's got your heart." The years passed, but the house did not change much. Its wood weathered, sure, and the porch sagged a little with time. But it stayed full of warmth, of laughter, of quiet nights and firelight, and the kind of love that didn't need naming anymore. Selene kept the ledger on the mantel, tucked between the Bible and a worn copy of Whitman. She still wrote in it, not often, but always with care. One entry read, "This life is not grand, but it is ours." And it is filled with the kind of beauty that doesn't need a witness to be real. On the first snow of their 10th winter together, Xavier brought in a basket of apples they'd kept cool in the root cellar. He set it on the table, then turned and caught Selene watching him. "You ever regret it?" he asked. She stood, crossed the room, and folded her arms around his waist. "Only that we didn't begin sooner." He kissed her forehead, then her lips, then held her there a long while as the snow fell beyond the windows and the fire crackled low. And that night, like every night, they slept with hands entwined, beneath a roof they built from love, and a life they'd forged with their own two hearts.